Okay. I'll use the microphone as long as it cooperates with us. So good morning, everyone. My name is Josh Matlow. I'm the City Councillor for Ward 22, and I represent Midtown Toronto at City Hall. And before that, I was a member of the Toronto District School Board. So I've had really a first-hand look at the challenges that both the school board has with respect to maintaining their properties, the pressures that they experience from the province with respect to dealing with their capital backlog, and also providing the excellent education that they do. But also from the city's vantage point, what role can the city play in preserving not only school buildings, but also in a wider context, the schoolyards and green spaces that are so critical for communities across our city, given the pressures that the TDSB is under. Now, I believe that it is unacceptable that we are faced with a choice in this city, in this province, between preserving our architectural heritage and ensuring that we have the school capacity to accommodate growing populations, certainly in areas like Midtown Toronto and in North York and other areas of the city where we are seeing a boom in population growth. But that is the situation we're in. And a few years ago, and I'm going to go back about 10 years ago, the TDSB realized that this was going to be a problem. Roughly 20 years ago, the condo boom really started in the Midtown area. And since then, when I became a councillor, I initiated a study called Midtown in Focus to, although it should have been done 20 years ago, begin to look and get hard data on issues ranging everything from recreation to school capacity to transit to public realm, and it also significantly includes architectural and cultural heritage, along with utilities and many other priorities. So in other words, rather than just allowing for growth, as the Provincial Growth Plan and the Places to Grow Act designated Yonge and Eglinton to have, we also need to make sure that everything from social services, infrastructure, and heritage are considered when that growth happens. Unfortunately, that wasn't part of the legislation at the time. And the TDSB identified a problem in Midtown. Now, the good thing is, it's a great area of town to live, and that's why so many young families choose to live there. I live there and I've got a 5-year-old daughter. I'm part of that problem. That being said though, those kids need a place to go. And they should go to a local school. And it is bizarre and absurd that we live in a reality that there are signs in front of condos or proposed condos saying, if you move in here, your kid may not even be able to go to the local school and be bussed out of the area. That doesn't contribute to a sense of community. It does contribute to gridlock and congestion. So the TDSB proposed initially to sell a parcel of the Davisville site, the Davisville Public School site, and work with a condo developer to be able to rebuild the school at the time and deal with the challenge that they had there, which was that the building has not been maintained properly. It was structured in a way that accommodated half the school as deaf and hard of hearing classes, which thanks to the cochlear implant, that they don't have the same demand for those classes any longer at that school. And there were just a number of structural issues that for them financially made it impossible to retrofit the building. It was, I think the estimate was somewhere between $10 and $12 million at the time. So they wanted to find a solution. By the way, this is before anyone had considered, and wrongfully so, any heritage merit there. So the school board was struggling as to what to do to make sure that they accommodated the kids in a growing community, but also made sure that there was a quality facility to be able to support the kids going there today or at that time. And they first wanted to sell to a condo developer. We said no to that at the city, primarily because the land that the Davisville Public School sits on is in what's called a neighborhood designated area of our official plan. That doesn't allow for condo buildings. And if any of you know Davisville Avenue, you will see that there was a very deliberate choice in our plan to allow for taller buildings on the south side of the street and then smaller buildings on the north side of the street to ensure that there wasn't a precedent set for taller buildings there that would then destabilize the neighborhood in between. The school board then worked on another option. which was to lobby the provincial government to provide them sufficient funding to replace the school. They did miraculously achieve that, and that doesn't happen very often, frankly. But the provincial government announced that they were going to give the school board, I believe, $14.7 million to rebuild the school. But as generous as this was, it was very, very restricted as to what it could do. It wasn't going to save the day. It wasn't going to accommodate all the new kids moving into the area. What it would pay for is a new facility that would be 2 stories and at-grade parking. And that wasn't good enough for us. This community, given that it's a growing community, also needed a recreation center. There wasn't one place that we were going to put it, but we were looking for a place to put it, regardless of the context of where it could go. But there are very few places in an area that has such high land value to be able to place something like that. So we as a city worked with the school board on a deal where if they were to redevelop the property, that we would have a long-term lease on the land to be able to have an aquatic recreation center with community space, and that we would ensure that the parking could go underground to accommodate that, the room that we needed to be able to do that partnership. It was, again, without the heritage context, a really good arrangement to accommodate the kids who are living in this area, to make sure that whatever the school would be like in the next couple of years would be remarkable, that there'd be more capacity for the incoming population, and there'd be a recreation center for the neighborhood. So many years on, this was I think in 2016, it came to our attention, due to the work of Kathy Naismith and others, that there was a significant concern about losing a potential heritage building. And there was a request to Mary McDonald, who's sitting here, who I want to acknowledge, who is a wonderful leader of our heritage preservation staff. And they requested that there be a review of the building to see whether or not it did indeed merit heritage protection. And it was staff's position, along with the Heritage Preservation Board, that it did. This is a building that was designed by Peter Pennington, along with some other schools across our city in the early 1960s. And it is an example of mid-century modernist architecture. So this was an education for me and many others at the time. It had never been brought up before. But here's the problem. There was more context to consider at the time. The ministry has very, very clear regulations and specific requirements about what you can do at that site. So for example, even if there was a suggestion, as there was, to do some adaptive repurposing, an adaptation to what you could do with that building, well, A, there is a regulation by the ministry that you can't just go and sell it to a private interest to do something creative there. It can't become the keg. It can't become even a artscape or something wonderful like a not-for-profit art center, because there'd be public agencies that would get the first right of refusal to be able to buy it, and it most likely might have gone to the French border somewhere else if it hadn't been retained by the TDSB. Another factor was that we don't want it to be either a keg or an art center or even something remarkable like maybe a not-for-profit incubator, because we need a school there. It wasn't a choice we could make, because we actually, not only do we need a school there, but we need more schools, frankly, and we're currently struggling to find, whether it be podiums and other condos or elsewhere, to accommodate the boom, the population growth that we're seeing in the Midtown area. So that wasn't an option either. There are also requirements by the ministry to ensure that, and these are things that may sort of make you roll your eyes, but they're true. You need to have space for a number of portables at grade on the site for potential growth. There's a child care center there that currently doesn't even meet ministry requirements because they've got the play area at the rooftop and it needs to be at grade. And there's a number of other retrofits that could have been and should have been done many, many years ago to accommodate that, but the school board simply didn't have the money at the time. So the school board made us an argument at the time that there are only 2 options and you only have a stick. If this is designated as a heritage building, we're not going to have a school there in the future, and we're not going to have the kind of school that's going to accommodate the growing population, nor are we going to have a school building today that won't have a roof that's always leaking, and boilers that are always breaking, and classrooms that actually meet the needs of the grades, the spaces that the ministry requires, etc. In other words, we're not going to have a building that will meet the needs of today's kids and future kids. And that's it. That's the only option. But we shouldn't have to be making that kind of choice in a society like Toronto and in Ontario. It's absurd that you need to sacrifice one choice for the other. We should be able to both preserve our heritage, architectural, environmental, as the ACO includes, and cultural, and be able to accommodate our kids in quality schools. So again, with a deliberate pun, this was an educational experience for all of us. Now, moving forward, what do I believe based on what I've learned through this experience? I believe that we need to be more proactive. We need to make sure that if there is a consideration about heritage, it should be part of the initial conversation, rather than come in at the 11th hour when all the plans are made, the funding's committed, and then there's only a choice of whether you do it or you don't. Number two, there should be a proactive survey, as Mary McDonald and her staff are doing with buildings across her city, partially due to a motion that I moved to council along with many of my other colleagues, to be more proactive about looking at both retail and residential, but also school buildings, so that we already know whether or not there should be protection. And that way, if a school board wants to consider rebuilding or redeveloping a site, there's no question that there's going to be restrictions there already, whether it be listed or fully designated. I also believe that, along with the school board and the city's responsibilities to do that work, the funding formula that the province has is out of whack with reality. It is not adequate, and it doesn't fund the school board's needs. Across the province, there's roughly $15 billion in capital backlogs in schools across Ontario. In Toronto alone, it's between $3 and $4 billion. And that's why there are going to be some people who will say, no matter what, we need to protect our heritage. And there are going to be other people, and I know they're here today, who will say, no matter what, we need schools in good repair, well-maintained, and to accommodate growing populations in our communities. I believe all of us should be saying the same thing and saying both of those messages to the provincial government. It should not be a choice between preserving our heritage and ensuring that we have quality school buildings for all of our kids. And it's shameful that we've actually arrived at a place in Ontario where not only do we have to make those choices, but the fact that we invest so heavily into so many things, and you know, it wouldn't be me if I didn't say, wasting $4 billion on one subway stop. Thank you. When I think it's a poor reflection of our society's choices, when the place that we send our kids is in disrepair and crumbling and falling apart, and there aren't sufficient funds to be able to support that. That is a sign of a society that has their priorities back asswards. So, that's a quote there. In conclusion, along with the batch listings and the, I think, very important initiatives that we're taking as a city to finally reverse the trend, I think Toronto has a shameful legacy when it comes to protecting our cultural and architectural heritage. You look at cities around the world and even close to home, like Quebec City and Montreal and Boston and others. They've done a remarkable job, not at protecting just one building, but entire neighborhoods, entire sectors of their cities. We've done the reverse in the faux name of progress. But what we're doing now is that we are giving the support to our heritage preservation staff for the first time to go out and do the work that they've wanted to do for years, to proactively create listings of our heritage buildings throughout our city, and asking them to do that for our schools. We should do that now, so this conversation never has to happen in the future. And lastly, another initiative that I've been working on, and I know many of you are very supportive of, is to finally create a City of Toronto museum, like great cities do. But the reason I raise this is not to boast about the work that we're doing on that, but to actually look at the great irony that while we may well in the next 2 or 3 years finally achieve our dream of having a civic museum where we can celebrate and share the history of our city. Should we only be focusing on a building where we are sharing relics and artifacts with visitors to our city and our kids alike, when really much of that heritage is already out there throughout our city in every neighborhood. And that's where we should be focusing on our preservation. So it was a hard lesson for us. I know it was a hard experience for you, but I want to thank the thoughtfulness and the leadership of Kathy and all of you at the ACO for the work that you're doing. And I know that I and most of my colleagues, and hopefully anyone who represents us at Queen's Park, hopefully, will join you in your advocacy to preserve our schools throughout our city, to both ensure that our architectural heritage is protected and ensure that we have great quality of schools for our kids. Thank you.